My family is pressuring me to give my 23F sister my 28F wedding venue because she needs it more and is pregnant. I had always dreamed of a wedding that felt like a storybook, not the extravagant kind with hundreds of guests and crystal chandeliers, but something simple yet beautiful. A place where everything was just right, the light, the setting, the ambience. I found it in a venue tucked away in the hills, overlooking a serene lake. The moment Adam and I visited, we both knew this was the place. The only problem, it was so popular, it was booked for years in advance. But we didn't give up. We locked in a date 3 years ahead, September of this year. I was in the middle of my FT program at the time, and planning a wedding wasn't something I had time for. Adam, though, took on the bulk of the work. He worked with the vendors, finalized the details, and we both eagerly awaited the day. 3 years felt like a lifetime, but we had a vision, and it was slowly becoming a reality. Every detail had been carefully thought out, the flowers, the music, the guests. It was all falling into place. We knew exactly what we wanted. There was no going back. But there was one person who seemed to ignore all of this, the one person who had no idea how much time, effort, and love went into creating this day, my sister Clara. Clara was younger than me by 5 years, and as much as I loved her, she could be a handful. She had just gotten engaged a few months ago, and while I was thrilled for her, I could already sense some tension brewing. She and her fiancé Ben were planning their wedding for the spring of the following year. They had nothing set in stone, no venue, no date. They had a few vendors in mind, but that was it. There was no urgency on their part. Clara, always the carefree one, was juggling her work and life while Ben was doing most of the planning. But unlike Adam and I, they weren't putting much thought into it yet. Then, a week before the family barbecue, Clara called to tell me she was pregnant. I was ecstatic for her, of course. She and Ben were so in love, but as I congratulated her, I had no idea the news would come with a request I would never expect. The barbecue was a typical family affair. The weather was warm, everyone was relaxed, and there was laughter and good food. Clara stood up in front of the extended family to announce her pregnancy, and the room erupted in cheers. Everyone gathered around her, excited and congratulatory. Then my grandmother, ever the practical one, asked a question that felt so innocent at the time. "Are you still planning to have the wedding in the spring, or are you going to wait until after the baby comes?" Clara hesitated for a moment, glancing at Ben before replying. "I think we'll move it to September. It'll be easier, and we can do it after the baby is born." The moment passed, and I didn't think much of it. After all, there was no reason why both weddings couldn't happen in the same month. My wedding was already set, but I figured there was enough space for 2 celebrations. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Then Clara turned to me. "I was really hoping I could ask you something," she said, her voice carrying a hint of desperation I hadn't noticed before. "Would you mind if I used your venue for my wedding? It's so beautiful, and I don't think I'll have time to plan everything with the baby. It would mean a lot to me if I could just have it." The room grew silent. I looked at Adam, who had been quietly listening, and he met my gaze. I could see the concern in his eyes. The venue had been my dream for so long. It was the one thing I had been sure about in the chaos of wedding planning, the one thing I had set my heart on. But now Clara was asking me to give it up. "Clara, I began, but she cut me off. "Please," she insisted, her voice strained. "It would just be so much easier for me. With the baby and everything, I don't have the energy to look for something else." I could feel the weight of my family's gaze on me. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for me to say yes. It felt like the right thing to do to help my sister. She was going to be a mom. She needed this wedding more than I did, right? But no, this was my wedding. I had waited 3 years for this moment, and I couldn't just give it up because Clara didn't want to deal with the planning. I had worked too hard for it. I had sacrificed too much. I can't, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been planning this for years. I can't just give it to you. The room fell even quieter. Clara's face twisted with frustration. What do you mean you can't? It's just a venue. And you've already had your turn. I'm your sister. You can't be so selfish. Adam spoke up, his voice calm but firm. Clara, this isn't fair. Your sister has worked hard for this. You can't just expect her to hand it over. It's her dream day too. But Clara wasn't listening. Her eyes filled with tears and she stormed off. My heart ached, not because I didn't want to help her, but because I was being made to feel like the villain in my own story. The rest of the family tried to console me, but it didn't feel right. My grandmother, who had been so supportive just moments before, turned to me with a disappointed look. You waited 3 years, sure, but it wouldn't have killed you to wait a little longer, would it? Your sister needs this more than you. I didn't have the words to argue with her. My mom, who had been strangely quiet up to that point, stepped in. When has Clara ever asked you for anything? She's carrying a child. This wedding is going to be so stressful for her. My heart sank. I had waited 3 years for this wedding, and now my family was telling me that I should just give it up because Clara needed it more. My Frank, Adam, was furious, and we left the barbecue shortly after, but not before my mother made a final comment. You'll regret this, she said, her voice cold. You should have helped your sister. That night Clara called me in tears. You don't understand, she sobbed. It's not fair. You always get everything you want. All I wanted was to have my wedding in the place I love. The guilt weighed heavily on me, but I stood my ground. Clara, I love you, but this is my wedding. I've worked too hard for this. You'll find another venue. You don't need mine. Her response was sharp, bitter. You must really hate me, don't you? She blocked me on social media that night. I was crushed, but I knew I had made the right decision. The next morning, though, I got a shocking message. My wedding planner, the one who had been with us since day one, had received a text from Clara asking her to rebook the venue under her name. She was planning to take it with or without my consent. I couldn't believe it. But when I called the planner, she assured me that nothing could be done without my approval. I was the sole person who could make changes to the contract. Things spiraled out of control quickly. My parents sided with Clara, accusing me of being selfish. My father sent me several angry messages, telling me I had made my sister cry. Meanwhile, Adam and I made the decision to remove Clara. The pressure from my family only increased after that. My mom went so far as to call Adam's parents and try to convince them to talk some sense into us. But Adam's parents, who had been nothing but kind and supportive, told my mom off in no uncertain terms. They told her that if this behavior didn't stop, they would have no choice but to cut ties with my family. I couldn't believe what was happening. My family was unraveling, all because I had refused to give in. But through all the chaos, Adam and I had each other. My future father-in-law even told us that if things didn't calm down, they'd be there for us no matter what. It felt like a terrible soap opera drama, accusations and misunderstandings. But in the end, I knew the truth, and that was what mattered. If my family couldn't see that, then maybe they weren't the people I thought they were. I had spent so much time planning for this day, and no one, least of all my sister, was going to take that from me. If that meant losing relationships with some of them, then so be it. I had to protect my own happiness. Update: the fallout from the family drama had left me feeling drained, but I couldn't bring myself to regret my decision. I knew that standing my ground wasn't easy, but I also knew it was the right choice for me and for Adam. The wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. Over the next few days, the tension in my family escalated. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, but most of them were from my parents, blaming me for ruining everything. My father sent a series of texts that were particularly harsh. "I hope you're happy now," one of them read. Your sister hasn't stopped crying since yesterday. She feels so betrayed. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was one thing for Clara to lash out at me, but my parents' reactions made everything worse. I kept asking myself, why was I the one who had to sacrifice everything? My parents seemed to think I should just let Clara have whatever she wanted, as though my years of planning didn't matter. Adam was furious, of course. He'd always been protective of me, and he made it clear that he would not tolerate anyone treating me like this, especially not my family. He told me he didn't want Clara at the wedding at all, but I was hesitant. Despite everything, Clara was still my sister. I couldn't just erase her from my life. The hardest part was realizing that my parents were siding with Clara. They didn't even ask me what I wanted. They didn't care to hear my side of things. It was as if I was just supposed to give in because she was pregnant and needed special treatment. The whole thing was so unfair, and the pressure was starting to feel suffocating. In the midst of all the chaos, one person remained a steady source of support: Adam's parents. His mom, Jane, and his father, Mark, were my rock through it all. When everything started to unravel, they stepped in and made it clear that they had our backs. They were both furious with my family's behavior and made it clear that no matter what happened, they wouldn't let my family's drama affect our wedding plans. One night, after I had spent hours crying on the couch, Adam came over with a bottle of wine, and we sat down with his parents to talk. They had heard everything that had been going on and assured me that my family's treatment of me was unacceptable. Jane in particular was furious with my mom for trying to interfere with the wedding planning, and she promised to support me in any way possible. "We know this is your special day, and it's about you and Adam," Mark said, his voice calm but firm. "Don't let them make you feel guilty for standing up for what you've worked so hard for." Their support meant more than I could express. It was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. I spent the next few days focusing on the wedding preparations. It helped take my mind off everything, but even so, the texts kept coming. My mom was relentless, sending message after message, begging me to reconsider. "Clara's pregnant, she's under so much stress, and you're making it worse. Don't you care about your family?" I didn't respond to most of them. It felt like no matter what I said, my parents would never understand. They couldn't see past their own favoritism to acknowledge how wrong they were treating me. And with Clara continuing to escalate things, it seemed clear that our relationship had changed forever. But then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the garden, going through some wedding details with Adam, my phone buzzed again. I looked down at the screen and saw a text from my brother Michael. He had been quiet throughout the entire drama, but now he was reaching out. I hadn't heard from him much since everything went down, but I'd always felt a sense of closeness with him. He lived in another city, so he hadn't been at the barbecue, and I knew he hadn't fully understood the extent of what had happened until my parents called him and told him their version of the story. "Hey, I heard about everything from Mom," he wrote. "I want to talk to you about it. Can you call me when you get a chance?" I wasn't sure what to expect, but I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone in the family would finally understand my side. I called him that evening, and we spent nearly an hour talking. Michael was calm and listened to everything I had to say without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Look," he began, his voice serious, "I know you've always tried to keep the peace, but this isn't about keeping everyone happy. This is about you and your wedding, and what's right for you. I'm sorry for what's happened. You shouldn't have had to go through any of this." I felt a huge weight lift from me hearing those words. It wasn't the apology I had been hoping for from my parents, but it was something. Michael acknowledged the wrong that had been done, and that alone felt like a step in the right direction. He went on to say that he had planned to attend the wedding, but he was uncomfortable with how my parents were treating me. He wanted to talk to them, to make sure they understood how badly they had hurt me. "I don't want to be caught in the middle," he said, "but I will back you up. You shouldn't have to carry this alone." I thanked him for his support and hung up feeling more hopeful than I had in days. Michael's willingness to stand by me made me feel like maybe there was a chance for some healing, even if it meant distancing myself. The days following were filled with preparations as the wedding date loomed closer. Adam and I had made some adjustments to the original plans. Since I had cancelled the catering arrangement that my parents had initially paid for, we worked out a new plan with our friends and family who offered to help prepare a homemade buffet. It wasn't what I had originally envisioned, but everyone chipped in, and it became a communal effort that turned out to be more heartwarming than I could have imagined. It felt good to be surrounded by people who supported us unconditionally, our friends, Adam's family, and even my aunt, who had been a huge ally throughout the whole ordeal. She was stepping in as a bridesmaid in place of Clara, and I couldn't have been more grateful. She had been a mother figure to me growing up, and her presence in the bridal party meant the world to me. But just when I thought things were finally starting to settle down, Clara's behavior took another turn. She reached out again, but this time it wasn't in a desperate, tearful plea. It was cold, calculated. She had seen the media coverage of our story somehow. It had gone viral, and the post was shared by thousands. It seemed like everyone had an opinion, and Clara had read every single comment. She texted me, furious. "You've painted me as a villain in all of this. You lied about everything. I didn't ask for your venue. I only mentioned it. And now you're making me look like a terrible person. You've ruined our relationship." I took a deep breath. It was clear that Clara wasn't taking responsibility for her actions. Instead, she was trying to shift the blame onto me, trying to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. But I had reached my limit. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. I sent a short reply. I didn't lie. I told the truth about what happened. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for how you handled this. I can't keep trying to make everyone happy. I have to think about my own happiness for once. I didn't hear from her for days after that. It felt like the final straw, but in a strange way it also felt like a release. I had finally let go of the idea that I could fix everything, that I could make it all okay. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you can't change people, and maybe that was okay. Maybe I didn't need to carry the burden of their expectations anymore. As the wedding day drew closer, things felt different. There was still tension in the air, but it wasn't as suffocating. Adam and I were in this together. We had made our plans, and we were going to make this day as beautiful as we'd always dreamed. My brother Michael would be there, and so would my aunt. It would be a day filled with love, laughter, and joy. Even if my parents couldn't be part of it, I knew that we had created something special, something that was truly ours. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a calm sense of peace that I hadn't felt in weeks. I slipped into my dress, surrounded by the women who had supported me through all of this. The ceremony was perfect, and the celebration afterward was everything I had imagined. I danced with Adam, laughed with my friends, and felt the love from everyone who truly cared about us. It was our day, and nothing, not even my family's drama, could take that away. As the sun set over the lake, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I was finally standing up for myself, and I was surrounded by people who truly cared about me. It had been a hard journey, but I knew that I had made the right choice. And in the end, that was all that mattered.